All right, welcome back to Seneca's Letters to Lucilius. We are on letter 67 here, which is actually on ill health and endurance of suffering. We're going to jump right into it here, and it can start here. He says here, if I may begin with a commonplace remark, spring is gradually disclosing itself, but though it's rounding into summer when you would expect hot weather, it has kept rather cool, and one cannot yet be sure of it, for it often slides back into winter weather. Do you wish to know how uncertain it still is? I do not yet trust myself to a bath which is absolutely cold. Even at this time, I break its chill. You may say that this is no way to show the endurance of either hot or cold. Very true, my dear Lucilius. But at my time of life, one is at length contented with the natural chill of the body. I can scarcely thaw out in the middle of summer. Accordingly, I spend most of the time bundled up. Okay, so he starts off talking about how spring is changing into summer, and it's cold. it keeps on going back to the cold. It's not quite summer yet, and he's not quite sure that it's going to stay warm yet. So he's a bit afraid to take a bath because he doesn't want to be cold. And he's talking about how yeah, you might say, well, hey, shouldn't you be subjecting yourself to the hot or cold, as he says here. He says, you may say this is still no way to show the endurance of either hot or cold. Okay, but he's saying, okay, at this time of life, I'm just contented with the natural cold of the body. Now, in a way, this is an excuse, right? This is an excuse. Let's be clear. Seneca is shying away from really Stoic practices here to a degree, but I also understand him, right? In the sense that, the cold shower thing, I've never done it. I'm probably never going to really do the cold shower thing. I have enough stuff that I'm doing, that I'm suffering through, that I don't really need to add the cold shower to. I just never felt like it was necessary for me. Now, again, am I making an excuse? Perhaps I'm wrong in that. Maybe so, right? But yeah, that's so I can kind of relate to Seneca in this aspect. All right. He says in verse 2, and I thank old age for keeping me fastened to my bed. Why should I not thank old age on this account? That which I ought not to wish to do, I lack the ability to do. Most of my converse is with books. Whenever your letters arrive, I imagine that I am with you, and I have the feeling that I am about to speak my answer instead of writing it. Therefore, let us together investigate the nature of this problem of yours, just as if we were conversing with one another. So he says here that his old age has fastened him to the bed. Again, I feel like Seneca's making some excuses here, right? Why should I not think old age on this account? That which I ought not to wish to do, I lack the ability to do. So again, he could be saying, it's stuff that I don't really want to do. I don't even have the ability to do it. So, hey, old age has kind of helped me in that regard. All right. He says here in verse 3, you ask me whether every good is desirable. You say, if it is good to be brave under torture, to go to the stake with a stout heart, to endure illness with resignation, it follows that these things are desirable, but I do not see that any of them is worth praying for. At any rate, I have as yet known of no man who has paid a vow by reason of having been cut to pieces by the rod, or twisted out of shape by the gout, or made taller by the rack. Okay, so let me read that last part again. At any rate, I have as yet known of no man who has paid a vow by reason of having been cut to pieces by the rod. Right, so he's saying here, this is a little bit confusing, but paid a vow by reason. That's where things are tripping, get tripped up here. So I think what he's trying to say here is that I don't know a man who has fulfilled on a promise, right? A reasonable thing, who has done paid back reason, right? So has done something to pay back reason by being tortured. That's essentially what he's saying, right? So that's the question that's being posed. The question that was posed to Seneca is, Lucilius apparently in one of his letters said, "Hey, look, you said that these things are good, right? So it's good to be able to endure torture. So is this something that we should want? I don't think so. I wouldn't pray for these things. It doesn't seem like something that I would want. I don't think I would want to be tortured. So is it are these are goods though? So if all goods are desirable, then what do you say about this? Right. So let's see what Seneca has to say. All right. He says here, my dear Lucilius, you must distinguish between these cases. You will then comprehend that there is something in them that is to be desired. I should prefer to be free from torture, but if the time comes when it must be endured, I shall desire that I may conduct myself therein with bravery, honor, and courage. Of course, I prefer that war should not occur, but if war does occur, I shall desire that I may nobly endure the wounds, the starvation, and all that the exigency of war brings. Nor am I so mad as to crave illness, but if I must suffer illness, I shall desire that I may do nothing which shows lack of restraint and nothing that is unmanly. The conclusion is not that hardships are desirable, but that virtue is desirable, which enables us to patiently endure hardships. Okay, so what he's saying here is that, look, it's not that we want bad things to happen to us so that we can endure them, right? To a degree. I mean, to some degree, there is some truth to that. But he's saying, like, these things like torture and war and starvation, all these things, it's not that we want these things, right? They are things that may happen, and if they do happen, then what we actually desire is to have the virtue to withstand those things, to withstand the suffering. That's what he's really saying here. Okay. He says in verse 5, certain of our school think that of all such qualities, a stout endurance is not desirable, though not to be depreciated either, because we ought to seek by prayer only the good which is unalloyed, peaceful, and beyond the reach of trouble. Personally, I do not agree with them. And why? First, because it is impossible for anything to be good without being also desirable. Because again, if virtue is desirable, and if nothing that is good lacks virtue, then everything good is desirable. And lastly, because a brave endurance, even under torture, is desirable. All right, so let's break this down a little bit, because this one's a little bit confusing here. Okay, so what is he saying here? He's saying there's certain people in the Stoic school, okay, that think that of all such qualities, a stout endurance is not desirable. So it's not desirable to have an endurance, a stout endurance, okay? Though not to be deprecated either. So it is valuable, but just not desirable is what he's saying here, okay? And he's saying, because we ought to seek by prayer only the good which is unalloyed, peaceful, and beyond the reach of trouble. So he's saying that because you should be only seeking the things that are essentially the goods that are without trouble, that are the good kind of goods, the goods that we want, we would say, okay? And he's saying, I don't agree with them. Why? Okay, because if something's good, it has to be desirable, okay? If virtue is desirable, and nothing that is good lacks virtue, then everything good is desirable, okay? And he's saying that brave endurance, even under torture, is desirable. So, again, he's making this point that it's not that we desire to be tortured. It's that we desire that we would have this kind of virtue, this kind of reaction to it. That's what he's saying is valuable, okay? At this point, I ask you, is not bravery desirable? And yet bravery despises and challenges danger. The most beautiful and most admirable part of bravery is that it does not shrink from the stake, advances to meet wounds, and sometimes does not even avoid the spear, but it meets it with opposing breast. If bravery is desirable, so is patient endurance of torture. For this is part of bravery. Only sift these things, as I have suggested, then there will be nothing which can lead you astray. For it is not mere endurance of torture, but brave endurance that is desirable. I therefore desire that brave endurance, and this is virtue. Okay, so he's kind of clarifying things here, and it makes a little bit more sense. Okay, so if you think about what the other Stoics were saying that he was opposed to, they were saying that, look, endurance, just enduring things, it's not really a desirable thing, right? I don't want to have endurance. I don't want to develop endurance. all right, in the face of torture. But what he's saying is no, I'm talking about brave endurance. I'm talking about this is a form of bravery. Bravery is a good, right? Bravery is desirable. Bravery is something that we want. And if you are able to endure torture in a brave way, then that is actually desirable. Okay, so brave endurance is what he's talking about. To be able to face the challenges of life, to be able to face the things that are going to be really hard, to be able to face torture, to be able to face these things. That's what he's saying is extremely valuable, if that makes sense. Okay. In verse 7, he says, "But you say, who ever desired such a thing for himself? Some prayers are open and outspoken when the requests are offered specifically. Other prayers are indirectly expressed when they include many requests under one title. For example, I desire a life of honor. Now, a life of honor includes various kinds of conduct. It may include the chest in which Regulus was confined, or the wound of Cato, which was torn open by Cato's own hand, or the exile of Rutilius, or the cup of poison which removed Socrates from Gaul to heaven. Accordingly, the praying for a life of honor. Accordingly, in praying for a life of honor, I have prayed also for those things without which, on some occasions, life cannot be honorable." Okay. So what he's saying here is, if you say whoever desired such a thing for themselves, well, there's some prayers, some things that you say that, they're exactly what it is, what the request is. Okay. But there's other prayers that encompass more than just, that encompass a variety of things. So for example, he's saying here, look, if I pray for honor, if I desire a life of honor, okay, it includes also some of these things that may be painful, the ability to endure what some of these historical figures have endured, right? So if we take, the cup of poison, which Socrates had to drink, all right, he drank the lilac poison. Now, why did he do this? Because he was honorable, because Athens had sentenced him to death. He was not going to avoid the sentence. He stood on what he believed. He chose to do that. That was an honorable thing. It doesn't mean that you're praying for that to happen to you, but you're saying that, hey, if this occurs, I wish to conduct myself in an honorable way. So again, he's making this real distinction here, because people are getting tripped up on this, and they're like, oh, well, I wouldn't want this kind of stuff, and there's no value in having these things happen to you. And he's like, yeah, I agree. It's not about that. It's just about, if life threw these circumstances your way, how would you handle it? And that's what we want, is that virtue of handling with bravery. In verse 8, he says, "Oh, thrice and 4 times blessed were they who underneath the lofty walls of Troy met happy death before their parents' eyes." What does it matter whether you offer this prayer for some individual or admit that it was desirable in the past? So he's quoting from the poet, from Virgil, okay, and the Aeneid there, and he's saying here that, look, why is it that you listen to this quote and you're like, okay, yeah, this is, yeah, definitely, right? These people who died fighting in the war of the Trojan War, yeah, that's great. It's an honorable thing. Okay, they're blessed. But why do you say that? Okay, this is just for some individual, or it was just desirable in the past. Would this not be true today? Would this not be true for you? Right? And again, how can we apply this to our own practical lives? Right? In the sense that you can't just avoid bad things. You can't just think that when bad things happen that is bad. You have to be willing to face the things, and you have to say, okay, well, if something happens to me, it's not about the thing happening. It's about how I handle the thing. That's what's important. That's what all Stoicism really is how do we handle these things? How do we handle the setbacks in life? How do we handle the hand that we're dealt with in fate, both good or bad? Because sometimes we handle the good wrong as well. So can we handle these things with honor? Can we conduct ourselves in the way that we would like? In verse 9, he says, Decius sacrificed himself for the state. He set spurs to his horse and rushed into the midst of the foe, seeking death. The second Decius rivaling his father's valor, reproducing the words which had become sacred and already household words, dashed into the thickest of the fight, anxious only that his sacrifice might bring omen of success, and regarding a noble death as a thing to be desired. Do you doubt, then, whether it is best to die glorious in performing some deed of valor? All right, so he's using a historical example of this guy, Decius, and he's saying that, okay, he just rushed in, right, into where he knew he was going to die. Why? Because he felt like doing this was an honor, because his sacrifice might be able to bring success to this battle that they were fighting, right? And he considered this to be a noble death, right? And he's saying, don't you think that's something to be desired? Don't you think that is a great way to die, performing a deed of valor, right? And so obviously that's not something that you want to do, but you want to have the ability to do that. Like, if that circumstances arises, would you not want to be the person who could do that? And that's what he's saying, that like you should desire that. All right. And again, the reason why people are getting tripped up on this is because they're like, well, if I don't want that. I don't want to actually do that. I don't want to be that guy, right? I want to just, hang back with my horse and not rush into battle and die. And that's why it's like that. I don't need that. I can be honorable. It's like, we can't choose the things in life, right? You can't just pick and choose and be like, all right, well, as long as it doesn't inconvenience me, then I will be brave. I'm brave. It's sort of like, I was having this conversation with someone the other day about kind of allegiance and loyalty and authority, right? If someone respects you as an authority, but it's only under the conditions in which they agree with you, or that things are going well, not under conflict, then it's meaningless, right? Because it's like, okay, well, yeah, I respect you. You are my king, but not if you ask me to do something I don't want to do. It doesn't make any sense. It's the same thing here, right? It's the same thing that people are like, I don't need that, because they don't want the thing that they don't want. Okay, he says here, in verse 10, when one endures torture bravely, one is using all the virtues. Endurance may perhaps be the only virtue that is on view and most manifest, but bravery is there too, and endurance and resignation and long-suffering are its branches. There too is foresight, for without foresight, no plan can be undertaken. It is foresight that advises one to bear as bravely as possible the things one cannot avoid. There also is steadfastness, which cannot be dislodged from its position, which the wrench of no force can cause to abandon its purpose. There is the whole inseparable company of virtues. Every honorable act is the work of one single virtue, but it is in accordance with the judgment of the whole council, and that which is approved by all virtues, even though it seems to be the work of one alone, is desirable. Okay. This one we're going to have to break down a little bit here. All right. So what is he saying here? All right. When one endures torture bravely, one is using all the virtues. So he's saying that if you endure torture bravely, you're actually exercising all the virtues. Why? Okay. Endurance is may perhaps be the only virtue that is on view and the most manifest. So we see endurance, right, as we'd call it. All right. And he's saying, but bravery is there. Why? Because it's brave to endure and to endure this torture. Okay. And endurance and resignation and long suffering are its branches. So he's saying of bravery, endurance and resignation and long suffering are the branches of it, right? Those are, the virtue of bravery. This is what bravery does. Okay. These are the offshoots of bravery. Okay. He says there too is foresight, for without foresight, no plan can be undertaken. So foresight means that you've come up with an idea. You've come up with a plan. You've chosen this path. All right. It is foresight that advises one to bear as bravely as possible the things one cannot avoid. So if you have the virtue of foresight, that is why you're making this choice, right? Why would you do this? Why would you bravely bear these things? Because you have the foresight of that. Okay. There's also steadfastness, which cannot be dislodged from its position, okay, which the wrench of no force can cause to abandon its purpose. So you're steadfast. You're sticking to your plan here, okay, or what you decided. All right. So he's saying that all of these together, they're inseparable. They all, virtue is really just the one thing. It is one direction that you are going, that you're taking with your life. Right. So you're either on a virtuous path or you're not on a virtuous path. Right. So, and yeah, we separate these things out. Okay. And we can call the different virtues and the different things that the way that they're exhibited, but they really are coming from the same tree, the same thing. Right. He says in verse 11, what? Do you think that those things are only desirable which come to us amid pleasure and ease, and which we beckon our doors to welcome? There are certain goods whose features are forbidding. There are certain prayers which are offered by a throng, not of men who rejoice, but of men who bow down reverently and worship. So again, do you think that these things are only desirable that come to us amid pleasure and ease, right? That we welcome? No, that's not it. We also desire things that are not of that. That's what he's saying. Okay. And he's saying it's not the things that people just these prayers that are of men who are rejoicing, but of men who bow down reverently in worship, who truly believe in what they're saying. In 12, he says, was it not in this fashion, you think, that Regulus prayed that he might reach Carthage? Clothe yourself with a hero's courage and withdraw for a little space from the opinions of the common man. Form a proper conception of the image of virtue, a thing of exceeding beauty and grandeur. The image is not to be worshipped by us with income or garlands, but with sweat and blood. This is a powerful statement here. He's saying to clothe yourself in a hero's courage. He's saying, step back a little bit, okay? Stop listening to what other people are saying. I want you to actually contemplate on the real image of virtue. Okay, it is a thing of exceeding beauty and grandeur. It's not something that we worship with garlands and incense, or it's not something that is so is that kind of thing that we just it's something that the way that we worship it is with sweat and blood. It is hard. It is not easy. It doesn't come to us easy. We cannot just pick the easy things in life. Yes, there are aspects of virtue that are good and pleasurable, but a lot of this is coming from sweat and blood. There's a sacrifice to be made here. That is why it is virtuous, because it is a hard thing. Otherwise, it would have no value. Behold Marcus Cato laying upon that hallowed breast his unspotted hands and tearing apart the wounds which had not gone deep enough to kill him. Which pray shall you say to him, I hope all will be as you wish, and I am grieved, or shall it be good fortune in your undertaking? So he's talking about Cato, basically the story of Cato where he tore open the wounds that were not going to kill him, to end his own life on his terms, right? And he's saying, when he did this, what are you going to say to him? I hope all will be as you wish. He doesn't wish that this would happen, but he chose this path because of his virtue. Or if you say, I am grieved, again, okay, well, what does that help him in this case? But instead, good fortune in your undertaking. Like, all right, I see what you're doing. I get you. Yeah, not an easy path, but you're taking it. Good for you. Like, yeah, I wish you the best in this. I don't disapprove of it. A lot of people will look at the virtue that we are exhibiting in our life, and they'll say, "Oh, don't do that. Don't torture yourself. Don't be so hard on yourself. You don't need to do that. Take a rest, relax." That's not helpful. It's not helpful to us when we know we're doing the hard and right thing. That doesn't mean that you should be beating yourself up, but it does mean that when you're on that right path, people will try to deter you from it because it makes them feel better, because it scares them. In this connection, I think our friend Demetrius, who calls an easy existence, untroubled by the attacks of fortune, a dead sea, if you have nothing to stir you up and rouse you to action, nothing will test your resolution by its threats and hostilities. If you recline in unshaken comfort, it is not tranquility, it is merely a flat calm. So he's talking about Demetrius here, who says an easy existence is like a dead sea. There's nothing coming in and out of it, nothing coming out of it. It's yeah. Okay. You need something to stir you up, arouse you to action. All right. They'll test your resolution by its threats and hostilities. If you recline in an unshaken comfort, it's not tranquility. It's just a flat calm. You haven't actually weathered the storm. So, the real tranquility that we're seeking is someone who can weather the storm, not someone who hasn't had the storm come to them. That's not what we're looking for. In verse 15, he says, the Stoic Attalus was wont to say, I should prefer that fortune keep me in her camp rather than in the lap of luxury. If I am tortured, but bear it bravely, all is well. If I die, but die bravely, it is also well. Listen to Epicurus. He will tell you that it is actually pleasant. I myself shall never apply an effeminate word to an act so honorable and austere. If I go to the stake, I shall go unbeaten. So some powerful words here. What is he saying here? Oh, he's saying the Stoic Attalus would say, I should prefer fortune keep me in her camp rather than in the lap of luxury. So he'd rather be shaken by fortune, right? He said, if I'm tortured but bear bravely, that's good. Then it's good. If I die but die bravely, that is also good. Those things are good. Epicurus, right? He said a similar thing. Okay. He said, if I go to the stake, I shall go unbeaten. You're not going to have to force me. That's what my fate is. I will accept it and go and do what I must do. That's what he's saying. I will bravely confront even the things in life that I don't want. In 16, he says, why should I not regard this as desirable? Not because the fire burns me, but because it does not overcome me. Nothing is more excellent or more beautiful than virtue. Whatever we do in obedience to her orders is both good and desirable. Farewell. Okay, so a few things I think I would like to say to kind of dissect this whole thing down here. I think the first thing to consider is that we're all going to die. So we're all going to face death. And this is why Seneca talks about this so much. And the question will be, how are you going to face it? Now, yeah, the prospect of being tortured, like I mentioned in some of these other letters, which was what it was like at the time, that is definitely more than just the deaths that we're likely to meet. And it's horrible. But people bravely face these things. Because when you don't have a choice, then what are you going to do, right? And what Seneca is saying here is he's saying, he says, it's not because the fire burns me, but because it does not overcome me. Nothing is more excellent or more beautiful than virtue. So think about this. It doesn't overcome you. That's the biggest thing you can take away from this, is that the value is that these things don't overcome you. You don't let things overcome you. Do you understand what I mean here? Do not let it overcome you. That is what the true virtue is. And so when I say don't let it overcome you, it doesn't just mean torture. It means that whatever you're going through, whatever emotions that you're facing, whatever struggles you're facing in life, you can either let them overcome you or you can not let them overcome you. Or how strong are you? Can you stand up against the things? And I can talk about that many times in my life. I have failed. I have let things overcome me. I don't feel bad about the bad things that happened to me. I feel bad about my reactions to them. Did I stand strong or did I buckle? We should strive to not buckle.